Okay, is it? Can someone check if the YouTube's like live? I mean, it says that it's live, but okay, it is. All right, never mind. Okay, we don't need to start. We don't need to start recording just yet. We're just on like session time can be in there, and yeah, okay. Then we can just do that, and then do that, and then I think you should be ready to go.
Yeah, it seems live.
Be a little sneak peek.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I keep saying that like being my TA, my TA is Mark. He's the friend. Yeah, but we're really good friends. But he's director and filmmaker and some that doesn't. Yeah, I didn't know, but he told me what he said. I'm like, well, how many projects have you done? I felt bad. That's when you got paid. Like, yeah, I just work out grand each. And I don't know if you're just like, yeah. And he does, if you look at his head, he keeps saying, oh, I'm not qualified enough to do this. Yeah. And it's only a course for about a year and a half. Graduate. 2019. About a year and a half since. Yeah. We've done about 3 projects together. Yeah, that one we talked about that. Just City. You want me to yeah. We're gonna do a bar. We're gonna do a bar.
Now you know that it's just like let's take all the very basic elements of each other, make it totally individual. And then there's like names. I didn't expect the zombies, so I was like, I didn't get a zombie movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the zombie movie? I'm not watching it.
But isn't it based on book?
Yeah, I don't like zombies. It was just weird though. It was like
It didn't have none of nowhere. It didn't. I didn't know anything
zombie
about
movie. Yeah,
but when I found out about it.
I might start off like maybe like Matrixy, like very, and it was cool. And I was like, okay, it's a zombie movie.
Why couldn't it be the same things that they were in the maze, but like worse?
Yeah, exactly. Like just zombie, or maybe there's like nothing on the outside. Maybe everyone looks normal on the outside. Oh, this is the first thing.
It's so cool, and it wasn't 3D.
The only thing 3D.
Oh, I was gonna say.
But this is what she was saying. And stuff was like slam form thing, but like Unity has its own class. But she was like, I hate this, and coded her own. Yeah.
Alright, okay. Alright.
I hate myself.
Oh,
What
okay.
is the shade of graphic the terrain? Okay, she started with
See,
and I'm pretty sure she hated it and built and made her own.
when I was thinking about the criteria for choosing people to do the workshops, I was like, oh, people that are graduated and people that are in schools. But I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, well, Orion isn't graduated, Andy isn't graduated.
Really
Yeah. So and then they're like, Hell's not in this course. I'm like, I'm just gonna do it that people are like, I don't I can't just have anyone be like, oh, I want to do that. What do you do? Like, how's your grades?
Like 2 years experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you're not. It must be just close. But it's like, you need to second year, so he would have done section.
Andy, yeah, at least.
More or less.
At least. I haven't actually asked him, but hey, Orion, how many years of experience have you had? Like,
Yeah, it's about 4. I think
4.
4.
If it was less than 2, you'd be out right now.
Yeah, no, it's
because I was gonna ask.
Wait, what? We're in 2021.
Yes.
Sorry, that's a dumb question to ask. I mean, yeah, it's been 4. Yeah.
I've been doing this for. So doesn't it? So 2016.
You're the president. You have to qualify yourself.
Dude, don't make that shit.
Yeah,
I could be a really bad artist.
we should be able to stop you.
Well, Darren was previous president and he didn't even have a portfolio like adults. Honest. It's like his work's like,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm still showing you this stuff. This is another thing she just.
It's so cute.
I'm sure this was an ad.
Alright, I'm talking to Heidi like
Do you have to be like doing like Sam's showing off the good stuff? Do you want to do a demo next summer? The land looks so good. Like, it looks so good. She's very strong. Oh, it's first
oh,
I'm just scrolling through all the messages she's ever sent. Oh yeah, we're playing the dream game later.
yeah, so this is kind of the obviously this is oh yeah, alright, so this part we're gonna get people to like come up with it. So like I'll explain it. He's really good at explaining stuff. Yeah, but basically based on these categories, we'll create a world with that. So like, for example, a last and then there would be magic.
You can explain it now.
Magic slide. She. Shop.
It's just say magic. If people want to say they have to be walking.
Yeah, we've got that.
You can explain it when you get to the point.
Yeah, no, but obviously coming across. Okay, what do we do? So, sorry. I'll just do an example and leave it. But like basically, Star Wars would be space, cosmology, space. That's one thing, and then over here in this category, we do military or government and
Like fashion.
fashion. Fashion. And like geography. It'd be probably geography. Got there as well. So like planets. So you pick a category here, 2 categories, so 2 things. But like we're making our like we've got this already prepared and people don't come up with anything. So you need to just finish. And then you've got archetypes.
What are we building from?
Well, I think it was Orion that was like, oh, we'd be continuing this outside of the workshop. I'm like, that's actually really good.
Yeah, but it doesn't like if
people are interested.
Well, then we can like.
Yeah, or like a animation.
Because that would like change the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, well, we can decide that. We can decide. We're not.
Oh, speaking of which, I should probably put down the
It's going to be very different if you're building it for like density. That's like really
Yeah.
the show. Yeah. It's like a game. You probably have like more complex designs. Maybe it's like an animation. You probably like
Yeah. Yeah. So we're kind of aiming to do something like what Simon's doing with Medicinal. Yes. Yeah. But like, it's not going to be our main focus. Our main focus is the workshop. But if people are interested, then we'll be continuing. Yeah.
I think it's really good things you can make. You know, like you can make like a character.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah. 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 So like, options would be yeah.
And that might be like a realistic, achievable goal.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know how many programs.
I don't know anything about games. Yeah. It's,
Sorry,
no, I'm just
even like do like splash art and stuff like that. Is that a character you workshop? Splash art each character. Yeah, like workshop is art.
yeah. Well, our main focus for the workshop.
Every year it's
Yeah. Our main focus for the workshop is like to create a world in a single image. And so many people are going to be coming.
in a single image.
Yeah. So yeah. To explain how many people are going to come. Micro groups. So might have like 2 images. So like that's why I'm saying like there'll be a person doing a character, like one character. I don't know. We're just gonna spitball what's to do what. Do different things and then we can do backgrounds.
I mean, that would totally like like a 2-page spread with the final
Yeah.
image.
Yeah.
And then all the work leading up to it, taking it even just be like a zine or something. It could be the start of it, we do like semester 2, you just get about
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone gets the project. You don't have to do it, but if you like to, you can make that. You can even kind of like everyone designs like puts in the work like 2-page spread. Each person has like their own 2 pages, and you get to design it. It's really stuff like a board.
Yeah.
And it brings you much more evenly with animation.
Do you want to wait maybe 5?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm not bothered.
Yeah. I'll check that.
All good.
the stream on.
Yeah.
Is it?
It's live.
Oh,
We've been live. I don't know if you.
oopsie doopsie.
And I changed OBS because you were streaming this screen before, so I was like, oh, go to the other one. That's alright.
Should we get rid of it, or should we? I don't know.
I'm not bothered. We got 2 people watching.
Okay.
I'm happy to start now, or if we want to wait longer, we can.
No.
It's all good.
No, we can start if you want.
All good.
Cool. Would you like the door to be closed?
Yeah, if you want. Probably turn the light off. That's the main one.
Or-
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Orion. You probably know who I am. And yeah, we'll just start off. I assume, have all of you touched Blender before, or is this your first time? First time? Alright, we'll go through just the general layout and movement and all of that. When you first opened or installed Blender, you probably noticed it asked you if you wanted to use left click or right click or a space bar, all of that sort of thing. Just I'll be using left click to select things like most other programs. You probably, like, they added that previous versions of Blender, it was always right click to select things, which was complete opposite to every other program we've ever used. So I'm glad they've changed it. But I'll also be using, if we go to preferences, key map, I'll be using spacebar as a search action because we're not doing any animating, so pressing play is not really going to help. And so when I just press spacebar, I can search up anything in the Blender. Alright, all good. Yeah, general movement in the 3D viewport is just middle mouse button. Shift middle mouse button to pan, and then just scroll to zoom. You can also see these gimbals up here. They'll do the same thing. The general layout, we have our tools on the left-hand side. So we've got move, rotate, scale, draw, and all that sort of stuff. I don't really use those. I'm used to using hotkeys, but for the first few things, I will be showing that we can use those as well. So this is the 3D viewport, and then we have our collections up here and our scene. So this basically allows us to, if we add a few more cubes, we've got our cubes up there and we can turn them off and on and hide, and this is basically our view layers. Down here is our basically properties of everything within our scene. So this is basically the tool that we're using. Will have different properties, rotate, where we want it to rotate from, and that sort of thing. This will be our render tab. I'll talk about these more later in the session, but essentially if I'm talking about certain tabs, this is where they'll be, and I'll show you where they are. The main ones we'll probably be looking at is world, render, and then modifiers. The rest aren't too important at the moment. Up the top here, you probably see different tabs, and we've got different ones that do different layouts. All of these layouts we can make ourselves and customize by just dragging, pulling and pushing the different bars. If we wanted to create more windows, we can right click, vertical split right there, and maybe we want this one to be a viewport as well. Not that that would be useful at the moment, but that's just how it will be. All good? All right. Yeah, we'll start by just modeling a pine tree because they're nice and simple and very recognizable. I won't be using the default cube, so I want to delete it. I can press delete, or I can also press X to delete. And then I'll go add up the top, mesh, and I want to start with the cylinder. You can also, as a hotkey, Shift A to add. I want to adjust the vertices on this cylinder. So before touching anything else, I'm going to go down to this bar down here. And I probably want about 8 sides. And I might make the tree a little bit skinnier and a little bit taller. I will adjust all the other settings later. Now that we have this, we can spin around and look at it, but the main thing that we want to do is to move it up. The shortcut for moving is G. And if we press Z, we can lock it on the Z axis. Is my pace all right, or would you guys prefer me to slow down, speed up? Be honest. Sorry, I'm probably rushing in my head. It's all good. If you need me to go over anything, let me know.
Maybe do it over again.
Do it over again? Yeah, no problem.
So you're not like doing nothing.
Yeah, no, all good. Add mesh. This one down here. Me? Are we all good? Yeah, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, so now we've got our tree stump or a log. And then so what we want to do is made a few loop cuts. So we want to divide it up a bit and then we can bend it. To do this, we can go edge and then loop, cut and slide. And as you can see here, all of our options have the hotkeys next to them. And so we just want to hover over it and then we want to scroll a few times. I'm probably going to add around 6 cuts. Down the bottom left-hand corner, you can see on the very bottom tab, it will show you how many cuts you're doing.
Wait, you're not subdividing your...
I'm adding loop cuts. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I completely forgot. Yes, sorry, my bad. Yeah, so the different modes of an object is up here, and I completely obliviously went into edit mode. And so that's this one here. The shortcut for that one is tab.
Yes.
Object mode, and then these are the different modes that an object can go into. Edit mode. Object mode. I'm on edge select at the moment, and then I'm just going to go edge, loop, cut and slide. hover over it and scroll a few times. It depends how many you want. I'm doing probably 6 to 8's good for this low poly style that we're going to go to. All good? Now I'm going to go into face selection mode, which is this one up here, or pressing 3 on the just on the keyboard. And I'm just going to select the top face. I'm now going to press proportional editing, which is with you can press O. And we can now, when we press G to move, or we can use the gimbal, we'll notice the proportioning editing is enabled. I don't want to move it. As we can see, it creates this S-curve, which isn't really how a tree grows. I just want to rotate it slightly, so I'm going to grab the rotate gimbal, or I can just press R. And then I'm going to rotate it, move it slightly. When you scroll, it will change the size of the circle, so how much you want to affect.
Like where it focuses.
Yeah, so the proportion, it essentially what's within the circle will be affected, and then what's in the center, yeah, and what's outside. And then with our proportional editing, these will be the different waves that we'll use to edit. Smooth's fine for now. So what I want to do is I'm going to change the viewport from this perspective to orthographic, simply by just clicking this, and I want to set it to the side view.
After you did the loops, how do you make it like stay loops? Because it's, for me, it's not like staying, like there's no loops whenever I do something else. So I'll do the loops, and then
Yeah, no, so you want to just do the loops,
yeah.
And then you just want to click.
Oh, okay.
There we go. No, it's all good. I should have said that.
All good. Sorry about
All good. No worries. I'm now going to start building the leaf structures. And so I'm going to add, out of edit mode, sorry, and then I'm going to add a cube. I'm just good. I'm now going to scale the cube down. And so I'm just going to middle mouse button. And then I'm actually just going to press S, and it should scale it. And then just left click to make sure that's happened. Yeah.
Moments of silence. Do you want to like introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm still a first year student, but I've been using Blender for about 4 years now. Orion Furbank-Meyer, yeah. Yeah, I really enjoy the 3D world and have been engaged in it for quite some time. And I'm not sure where I'm heading in the future, but I do enjoy teaching people different things. And as you can probably tell, this is my first workshop. But yeah.
I think that it's like learning on the job.
Yeah. That's Now I'm going to go back into edit mode by just pressing tab this time. And then with face select on, I'm going to select the top face and then just press S, and you'll notice the circle's still on. And so I want to turn proportional editing off because I don't want it.
How many times are you going to be doing the trees?
We'll only have to make one tree,
Yeah.
and then I'll show you how to make them all slightly different and variations. We're not going to sit here and do this 20 times, trust me. But that's all right. Are we all ready for the next step?
Yeah.
So I'm going to introduce you to modifiers. And the simplest modifier that there is, that everyone uses in almost all 3D work, is the subdivision surface. So we're in the modifiers tab, and then we'll add a modifier, subdivision surface. And as we can see, we've created an egg, and that's not exactly what we want. Combining the subdivision surface with, now back into edit mode, we'll see this is our original shape. And now if we use our loop cuts again, we'll just add one this time, and we can slide it up, and it will control the amount of curvature. And I just want to add another one, and I'm going to use Control R this time, and just click, slide, and then just left click again.
Oh, where's the subdivision button?
Just on these right hand side tabs, it would just be the little blue spanner.
Oh.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Now that we have the top of our tree, all of these elements can be scaled and moved about as much as you want. I'm just going to scale these bottom loop cuts out. And the way I selected that entire loop is just by Alt clicking. And that will select the loop. I'm using face select, but if we press 2 or click up here to go to edge select, you can also select the loop cuts there. And then by double tapping G, you'll be able to slide them if you wanted to change their location. I'll just go over that one again. So in edge select, Alt click to select the loop, and then G will move it around. But if we press G one more time, it will make it slide along the edges. Now, I think my tree is a bit thick at the moment, so I might just scale it down. So I'm just by pressing S, and then I'm going to lock it to the X and the Y axes. And so I can lock it to the X, but if I press Shift Z, sorry, it will lock it to those. axes. It's going to move this one across, rotate it with R, and then scale it slightly. Now to duplicate these, I'm going to use Shift D or Object Duplicate. And then it will just follow your mouse, but if you just right click, it will snap back to where you duplicated it and you can move it down. Rotate it with R, G to move it, S to scale. And I'm just going to do that one more time. Object, duplicate, or Shift D, click, move it down, S to scale, scale it out slightly. If you want to select multiple objects, we just hold down Shift and click on them. And then they will all be scaled together or moved together. I might just scale mine down slightly. I'm just going to edit this horrendous thing. I'm just going to add a little branch. So I'm just going to add or Shift A, another cylinder. It should be in the same shape with the same amount of sides as the... What's it called? I've completely forgotten what the center of a tree is called. Trunk. That's sorry. I had a mental break. And then going back into orthographic view by just clicking the little Y. I'm just going to scale, rotate with R, G to move, scale, G to move, rotate with R. Now we want to join all of these together. But if we start joining objects with a subdivision surface on and objects without, things can get a little bit weird. The objects you don't want subdivision might have subdivision, or you might lose the subdivision on the ones you want. So we need to apply the subdivision so that it kind of sets it in stone. To do that, we're going to Shift A, sorry, not Shift, Control A on the subdivision on each of the tree leaves. So just Control A, Control A. And now if we go into edit mode, we'll see that now we have all this geometry we can play with. But if we wanted to move our tree around, we notice that everything's not connected. So what we're going to do is we're going to want to connect everything. So we're just going to shift click everything. And then we're going to go just object and Control J or just join. And now it is all one object. I'm not sure why they haven't added, although they do have it right there, apply, apologies. Now we're going to make a sister tree. And by doing that, we're just going to duplicate. And you'll notice we have duplicate linked and duplicate objects. So if we Shift D, we'll make a duplicate that we can edit, and this one's not edited. But if we Alt D, we'll make two copies of the same thing that are identical to each other. If one moves, the other one moves. This is good for when filling out a scene with a few of the same objects. Suddenly, if you need to adjust something on one of them, it does it for all of them. At the moment though, we just want to create a duplicate with Shift D so that we can make a variation.
Do you want to do it again, like the tree?
Yeah, I can make another tree.
Yeah.
So add mesh cylinder, change it to 8 vertices. I might actually make this tree a little bit skinnier. Change the radius. If you hold Shift, it will make the amount you're changing it a lot smaller. Transforming it, tab into edit mode, edge, loop cut and slide, scroll until about 6 cuts or so. 2 is edge select, 1 is vertice, and then 3 is face. They're just up here too. I'm going to select the top face. Proportional editing up here, also enabled by O. And then I'm going to G to move, R to rotate. And then this one I'm actually going to scale it down a little bit. And with proportional editing on, you'll notice it creates this nice little point.
Did you do the focus again? The circle with the...
Just this one up here, so proportional editing. It can be enabled within edit mode and within object mode. So it might be on in object mode, but then when you tab in, it's enabled, yeah. And the shortcut for that one's O.
When you're on the side of you,
Yeah.
how do you make it in perspective?
Just middle mouse and rotate around. Should change it. Or you can just use this gimbal. If you have a number pad on your computers, I know some laptops don't, the shortcuts for different views, like number pad 1 is this view, number pad 3 is the side view, and then 5 is switching between orthographic and perspective. And then 4 and 6 will slowly rotate around. 7's top. And then I believe, yeah, and then 9 is switching. to the other side. And yeah, over time, if you start using your number pad, you'll just get used to flipping around without having to click. And then if you're in a perspective mode, you just want to middle mouse out of it. This little button on the side here with the grid, this is going between perspective and orthographic mode too. And so sometimes you'll be in orthographic mode where everything is the same distance to your screen, or like there's no perspective essentially. But then with perspective mode on, things start to have more perspective. Different, when you're working on different things, one way could be better than the other. But the main thing is just before you render anything out, or if you're having issues, you might be in orthographic field view. It just might not look right and things are just being too close or that sort of thing. But back to the tree, we'll tab back out of edit mode. Shift A to add, or add mesh cube. And then we don't need to play around with this, but I will. I'm just going to turn the cube down a little bit, scale it, move it along, up, and then tab into edit mode. 3 for face select, or likewise clicking up here. Just select that top face, and then we're just going to S to scale it down. And as you can see here, proportional editing is still on, so I just want to turn that one off. Now in the modifier tab, going to add a subdivision surface. And now we have an asparagus. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, Control R to add a loop cut, click, slide, left click, slide, left click. In the modifier tab, we have all the options for the different things that each modifier will have. And so we can always turn the subdivision up depending on what you need it for. But at the moment, we're creating a pretty low poly thing. And so I only wanted one subdivision. It saves me modeling each of these faces individually. Up the top of our subdivision here, we have all these different options that we can turn on and off. At the moment, when we're in edit mode, we can see the original geometry and then the affected geometry. If we click this button, we can then edit the affected geometry in various ways. Preferably, I like having it like this. In my head, I can visualize it better, what and how the geometry is reacting to the modifier. And then if you want to completely turn it off when in edit mode, you can click this one, and then it will only be affected when out of edit mode. And then this one's display it in the preview, and this one's display it in the render, and we'll get to rendering later. For the moment, I just would leave them like they are. We'll go back into front perspective view, orthographic, apologies. And then we're going to object, duplicate, click, rotate, scale, R and S, and then I'm going to go Shift D to duplicate, move it down, and then scale. I'm not enjoying how pointy or how non-pointy this tree is. So I'm just going to go into the top one, tab it, loop select with face mode accepted, So Alt click and then just scale it down. Oh, a bit of the trunk is coming through. And so I'm just going to move that in. And now I'm going to add a little branch. Shift A to add. Cylinder. Probably, I'm just going to have 6 sides. Enter. And then turn the radius right down and the depth, make it quite small. G to move. R to rotate. And then I'm going to scale this one quite small. And maybe I'll just add Shift D to duplicate. I might just add another little one down here. Of course, anything I'm doing here, feel free to just like change it however you want. Like my trees are pretty ugly, but if you think yours looks better because you've done something else, go ahead and do that. I might scale this trunk down slightly too. And then I'm going to shift select everything. I can, before, if I only had one tree, I could press A to select everything, but now we've got those. But I can also just shift click to unselect stuff twice. You notice when you shift click on something while everything's selected, it goes a highlighted orange, and that's the main one it's selected to. And so essentially when we join things together, it will be, all of the dark orange will be joined to the light orange. And up here we can see that we'll be all joining to cube 1. And to join it, Object, Control J. And as you can see here, I forgot to apply the subdivision surface. So we'll Control Z to undo that. Apply. Apply. And apply. Shift click. And then Control J to join. I might just name these now before we have 1,000 cubes. So this one I'm just going to name smaller tree just by double clicking on the name. Tree 1. Now to make a variation of these trees, we can do many things, but I think the easiest way is just to, and the quickest way, is to just tab into it, maybe grab this face, or even press 1 and grab the vertice. Proportional editing is our friend. Turn that on. G to move. And then we can move it slightly, rotate it, squish it. The falling off, the way that the curve works, how we edit it in the proportional editing, you can play around with the one called random, and essentially everything that's not selected within the circle will move in a random direction. So when we press G, we'll notice we get some really awful results. But we just want to do it very, very subtly. I might just do that to this one too. So tab, select it, make sure proportional editing's set to random, and then just G, and subtly move it. duplicating this smaller tree just to make another little variation. And as you can see here, the naming convention will copy over. And then I just want to rotate this one. R and G. And no tree grows the same branch, so I'm just going to make sure proportional editing's turned off. I'm just going to move this one maybe to the other side and slightly lower, just by pressing G and moving the camera around. And I might scale it slightly.
The branch. And it's all joined.
Oh, sorry, yeah, when it's all joined, if you just press L, it will select everything that's a separate object. Likewise, that's only if you hover it over, but if you, let's say, just have this vertice selected and you want to select everything that's connected and closed to that vertice, Control L will do the same thing. And you can find that also up in Select. And then just, I think it's Select, Linked, Control L. If you're ever looking for something and you just cannot remember the hotkey, because I've probably gone over it too quickly, feel free to let me know. But first, you can also look through all these tabs and they'll have all the hotkeys next to them. But yes, don't depend on that. If I'm here, let me know, please. As we can see, our trees, the little orange circle is essentially the origin of the object. And so if we move or rotate, all the geometry will rotate around that point. And to just set the origin to the center of the object, we just right click, set origin, origin to geometry. And that would just mean when we're playing around with our tree, it won't be following some random origin somewhere or a part that you weren't expecting. Now, let me know when you're ready to start texturing, or we'll move into the shading editor.
How'd you learn so much about 3D?
YouTube courses online, that sort of stuff. Pretty much. Yeah, for like this year's probably the first time that I've spoken to someone who's actually used it, like in person. Yeah. No, it's really nice though, and like yeah.
Search up your problems.
No, and it's really enjoyable discussing it with people and talking about different workflows and whatnot. But yeah, just sitting down, spending a lot of time playing around and watching videos. But no, yeah, even little things I noticed, like I completely forgot how to say to select a thing or that, and I mean Harry's onto me, but yeah, let me know if I've done something and I've unconsciously done it. once we're happy with our trees, we're just going to add some simple materials. I'm going to go into the shading tab up the top, and that will just change the layout. So what we need to use is easily accessible, sorry. There we go. By pressing Z and holding it down, you'll notice there's these different views. And so there's wireframe, solid, which we've been using, and then there's preview, and then there's rendered. At the moment, I'm just going to go into material preview so we can see the materials that we're adding to it. For each object, it has essentially material slots, and then we can apply those slots to the objects. Like an object can have 3 slots, but you could have 60 materials, and then you just basically select which one. So down the little red circle near the bottom is the object's materials, and all we want to do is just create a new material. Here up the top in this dark grey box is our material slots. And so we want to create the tree leaves and then the wood. And so I'm just going to call this one leaves. I'm just going to create a new slot, and you'll know that there's no material in this slot, but we're just going to create another material and call this one wood. What's on this side panel right here is exactly what's in this node editor down here. Here are our slots, and here are our materials. As we can see, the default material is in our materials, but there is our slots. Essentially what we want to be doing is assigning different polygons to the different slots. And to do that, we just want to tab into edit mode, and then using L, hover over the parts you want, and we'll just select those leaves to select all of it. Then we want to assign those to leaves, assign. And then since we've selected the leaves and we want everything else to be wood, instead of unselecting, going through and selecting everything, we just press Control I and it'll invert our selection. And we want to assign that to wood. You can also do that in here. Now, since we're in wood and we change the color, we'll notice that we start getting some brown or whatever color you want to select. Control I. Something that even I do quite a lot is accidentally go when I want, all right, now we want to change the color of the leaves. And I'll come over here and go wood, no, I want leaves. But you notice I'm still in slot 2, so I've just set the trunk to leaves. Instead, I want to go wood, slot 1 to leaves, and that should automatically change. And I just want to change the base color to maybe a dark green. All of these settings on the side are all just in here. All I'm playing around with is just this base color. I might turn that green down a bit. It's a bit intrusive. That's ugly. And now to apply this to all of the trees, we essentially have to do the same thing, but I'll show you. Instead of coming here, creating a new material, what we can do is we can actually drag these materials. If we just click on the little circle, either here or here, and then just drop it onto that object. That. and we'll go slot 2. Drag it on top. But what I've just done there is, because the trees only have one slot at the moment, I've only given them wood, which was my bad. I want to create another one, and just from this drop down here, leaves. Tab into select, L, 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 and then assign leaves. L, new material, new slot, sorry. Assign leaves. So we want to go a new slot, create a new material, or select the old one. Tab into edit mode, select those with L, add a new slot, add a new material or select an old one, and then assign. We can also use materials to access certain parts of geometry without having to reselect them. So if we, let's say, go into this tree and I just want to select the leaves geometry and I don't want to have to keep pressing L, I can just go leaves and select. Deselect, wood, select. At the moment in the preview mode of the material preview, all of our shading options are just up here. Essentially at the moment we're just using a HDRI and they have a few presets just in there. Preferably for outside scenes, I do like the default, but you're welcome to change any. Keep in mind though, this is only for just us looking at it now. This won't be in the final render. And all the options for it is there as well. I'm just going to create, to show you guys the node setup, I'm just going to create a very simple node where essentially we're just going to be adding some noise to the texture, to the object, sorry, and then editing that noise so it's creating the colors and patterns that we want. So this is the node window. Everything's pretty much the same. G to move, S to scale won't work, but most windows have the same options like applying and duplicating, like Shift D to duplicate. It carries across. But what we want to do is add a texture. And for this example that I'm showing, I like using the Voronoi. I'm probably obliterating that word, but this texture. And then if we just plug the color into the base color, you'll notice that we've got this fancy rainbow pattern. And that's not really what we want. I'm going to do this on the leaves instead of the wood. So slot 1, add texture, Voronoi, and then we're just going to plug the yellow to the yellow into the base color. Essentially, the node network, it's like a railway, so it just starts from the left to the right into the material output. I mean, you can swap them about, but things are on each side for like a certain reason. The colors on each little dot are just to help us out for where and what plugs into what. The green will always be a shader, and so that's essentially telling the lighting how to react on the geometry, and then yellow will be color, and then purple will either be like a normal maps or just dealing with normals and various different shading techniques or whatnot. So now that we have this, of course we don't exactly want rainbow colored trees. Not that we wouldn't, but we're going to go for some green. And to change that, we're just going to move this over and we're going to add a converter. And so essentially all of these go in the middle of, let's say, a texture to a color. And we're going to use a color ramp. And essentially this is just a gradient which will convert all of that color data into a gradient and then spit it out on the other end. We can move these, and as we can see, we can get different varying effects. The colors also can be changed, is what we're going to take advantage of. So we maybe want a dark green. And maybe a nice little pine needle or something like that. At the moment it looks pretty bad. I'm going to move the scale, make it quite small. I'm probably going to go about 25. As you can see, the more we move, the more shows. And just like all gradients, they have different ways of blending from one color to another. If you like the effect of having these mid-tones in between, feel free to leave it like this, but I wanted more just like it's either this color or the other color. And so we'll just go from a linear to a constant interpolation. Now it's all green, and we just want to bring this one over. And I'll just add little spots everywhere. Feel free to play around with the texture settings as well. But for this example, I found F1 just works the best, or smooth F1, depending on if you want geometry spots or circles. To change how essentially we're applying this texture to the object, we're going to add a mapping node. Add vector mapping. And this essentially allows us to alter where things are mapped onto the object. But as we added it, it's done nothing because it's needing some data to tell it how it's going to apply it to the object. And this you will probably heard before of this is UV unwrapping, or there's procedural ways of just generating a random point. So to do this, we're going to add a input and then a texture coordinate. We're just going to plug the generated into the vector. And now we have all of these options for rotating, changing the location, and even scaling on certain axes to create varied effects. I'm just going to leave mine at 1. And so we've got an input from a texture coordinate, changing how this texture is changing the colors into a principled BDSF, and then to the material. I want to change the roughness of the leaves as I think they reflect too much light. To do that, I'm just going to go down to this roughness tab, and 1 will be it reflects no light, 0 will be it's basically a mirror. So I want to probably turn it up a little bit. Again, for your own style or whatever you want to do whatever fits your needs. This principled BSDF, it seems like there's a lot of little numbers everywhere and different things you can change. But essentially, it's just combining a lot of these nodes. Previous versions of Blender didn't have this. Instead, we had I'm just going to Shift A diffuse, what's it called? Rough. They had all these shaders. What was it? A glass one. That's what I wanted. And essentially, it would just combine all of these, and you'd have to do a mix shader, and then plug them all in and change it. This, however, gives us everything at once, which can be a bit overwhelming, but it's so much easier to use, and overall the user experience is just easier. I don't really need to touch any of the other settings for this, but I might go over some of them later. To copy our texture to our wood, maybe we want some different variation on the stumps. All we have to do is just like Microsoft Word, Control Copy, go over to wood, and then Control Paste with Control V. Plug that one into there, and we have created Shrek the tree. Of course, come in here, change the colors to how you want. And you can also change the scale. Because we have duplicated these, they're not linked, so if we change anything in here, it will only change it for this setup. It won't create any changes on this one. A feature that not many people use that I've seen is that you can actually control copy and control paste colors. So if I just hover over this dark green and just Control C on my keyboard and go to this light one, hover over it and just Control V, it will just paste it. And essentially you can take colors from anywhere, any tab, and as long as it's got this just straight color bar, you'll be able to just copy. I'm going to go back to our layout. And I'm just going to change a few things that might cause us issues later down the line. If we press N, you'll notice this tab will pop up. And this will just show us all of the various data on each object, where it is, how much it's rotated, its scale, and whatnot. For instance, when using certain modifiers, they completely depend on the scale of the object. And so we think our trees, if they're done at your happy state, and we just want to go, right, this is scale 1. It's not 50% of what it's meant to be. And to do that, we just want to go Control A and apply the scale. Object, apply, and then scale. I'm going to go back into shading and probably flip these. These are probably not the best examples of good looking trees, but I think I'll just use them anyway. I'm going to now create a small little landscape. Is everyone good with that, or we want some more time? You good? All right. All right. Yeah. You good? All right. I'm going to add a plane. And so this is just no, it's not a shape, it's just a plane. And then I'm going to probably make it about 5 meters squared, or radius, sorry. I might turn it up a little bit, maybe 8. However big you want your little world to be. I'm going to go Z back into solid view. That's hurting my eyes. And then with this, I want to subdivide it. And I can add the modifier, but I don't want to be using the modifier when I go to extrude it down to create thickness. So what I'm going to do instead is go tab into edit mode, just right click and subdivide. I think I'm going to make around 20 cuts. Subdivisions, sorry, not cuts. Maybe 25. And so this is just adding geometry that then we will push around and play with to create hills and just more variation than the plane. To do this, as much as we could use proportional editing again, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually show you the sculpting tab. Once. So when you press subdivide, does it just disappear or does this pop up? 1 and 10. I was going to say, what version of Blender are you using? Down the bottom right hand corner, it should say. Okay. Wait, are you? Oh, you're using the mouse. So if you just manually type in the number, you can go over the parameters. Yeah. It's not, what's it called? It's not bad. There just might be some small differences, but let me know if there's it. No, that's fine. Like if you go, this is different for me, I'll just help you out. It's all good. Pretty much we're after 2.8, so it's all good. So yeah, I think I did about 25 or so, whatever scale you want the geometry to, whatever size you want the, what's it called? The low polyness. So anyway, tab out of that, and then we'll go into the sculpting mode. Now, as we can see, there's no more geometry, and because we have the plane selected, just using the sculpt draw default brush, we can just start drawing on. Of course, I'm going to undo that and maybe just turn up the radius a bit and just make some very subtle changes. Hold. Yeah, I was gonna say, instead of it's now control to do the inverse of what. I'm going to delete. I'm going to do that again. I think I added too many subdivisions. I apologize. Should be set. Tab, and I'm just going to subdivide it maybe about half of what I did. I still want it to look pretty blocky. Sculpting. If your trees are getting in your way and you're getting annoyed at them, just click the little eye and we'll just turn them off up on the top right hand corner. I'm just going to make my landscape pretty generic and small. I'm not going to do anything crazy, but you're welcome to do whatever you feel like doing. After you're done sculpting, I'm just going to go back into edit mode, tab, and then with A, I'm just going to select everything. And then I'm going to use extrude. And I haven't shown you extrude yet, but essentially it's just this one here, or easier, just press E. And it should extrude down on the normal, which at the moment is the Z axis. If not, just hit Z to lock it back in. I probably want it about that thick. I want the base of my little landscape to be flat. So what I'm going to do is go into orthographic view, and as you can see it's not very flat at all, and I'm just going to scale it but lock it to the Z axis and then just press 0, and essentially it will scale everything down to that 0 point. I'll just do that one again. Select everything with A, E to extrude, and then scale on the Z axis by nothing or 0. Once I'm happy with that, I'm just going to go to shading again, and we'll just start adding some grass or whatnot. I'm going to use the leaves scene to start me off so I don't have to add all of those nodes again. The leads material, sorry, not scene. But now if we want to change it, it will change it on the leaves as well because we are using that material. To make this a unique material just for the ground, we just click this new material. And essentially it will duplicate it, it will name it as 001, and we might just want to call this one ground. Now we can play around with the scale, change the colors. As well as the color, like I told you before, if you hover over any number and just Control C and then Control V, it will add it to your selection. So if I change this to like 34, and instead of manually typing 4, I can just go Control C, Control V. If we look at the ground, we notice that there's some really weird distorting going on, as it's not too sure how to essentially place the texture onto the landscape, and that's because we're using just a random generated. When we add a plane, it's automatically UV unwrapped just as a box, and because all we've done is extruded it down, we won't have to worry about unwrapping anything, but we can use the UV, so we'll just change it from generated to UV. And there we go, that's not looking as stretched and weird. Of course on the sides it is, but we're going to color those black anyway. To color them black, all I'm going to do is just add another slot. on the face select mode, I'm just going to alt click to select that rim, assign it, and then just add a new color. Maybe make it black with a big roughness so it doesn't reflect any light. The bottom at the moment does have the shader on it, the noise, sorry. Let's call that. But to select those faces, we can go into the edit mode, Z into the wireframe, 1 to the vertices. And then there's a different selection modes, and I'm just going to use B for box select. And it'll make me a box that I can then select just those vertices. The reason I'm in wireframe mode is so I can select the ones behind, because if I'm in object mode, it will only select these first set, not all of them. And then I'm just going to assign it to that black. You probably noticed also I've just gone into edit mode within the shading window. That's because the 3D window is the same for all of these tabs up here. I'm going to add, I'm just going to do some simple playing around with some noises to create some more variation in the ground. Do that, I'm going to go back to slot 1. I'm going to combine 2 different types of noise, or actually just 2 of the Voronoi noises, to tell the plane to display some color ramps in some spots and others in not. I'll show you what I mean. Move these over here. What I want to do is just Shift D to duplicate this noise. And I want to duplicate the color ramp. Plug it in. And I want to use the same UV space. So I'm just going to plug the vector in. Now I'm going to add a mix RGB node. Add, should be converter. Or is it color, sorry? Mix RGB. Essentially what this node is like a layer in Photoshop. And so this will be the layer below and the layer above. And this will essentially work as the layer's mask. And then you've got all the default hue, light and screen, dodge, all of those. I want to actually create a third Voronoi texture, but instead I'm just going to add it set as default. And then I'm going to add a default color ramp as well. So it's just black and white data, and I'm going to plug that black and white data into the factor, because this will be acting as our mask. I'm going to color the first color ramp into there, and the second one I'm going to unplug and plug into the bottom layer. And now when we plug this in, and of course these are exactly the same of each other, if we make some variations, we'll start to notice that this is affecting how these two are being displayed. I want to change it maybe to a multiply. And I want to maybe set this one to a linear constant, sorry, as well. There we go. And I'm using distance. I've accidentally plugged the distance in. That's why I'm getting some interesting results. I might just want to use the color instead for that more geometric view. Not liking that. Is that? So maybe want some spots with some more leaves. And I'm just going to add little grey spots, only subtly everywhere, just for some little like rocks. It's going to plus to add a new colour that I can move around. And I'm just going to turn that all the way down and then turn the value up slightly until I get something looking a little bit like a rock. Of course, this is way too many, so I'm just going to turn them down right down. Of course, if you always want to zoom in, you can extend out the color ramp. And just playing around with colors, different. You can stack your mixing just like layers. So we could make 4 variations of this, mix them all together in different ways, but I'm not going to do that. Now that I'm happy with the ground, I'm just going to go back into layout and I'll just start placing these trees around. Just go material view. So just with the moving gimbal or pressing G, we'll just move them around. We can rotate them slightly, just pressing Z to lock them to the axes. For larger landscapes, there is particle systems and scattering, so we can have a gazillion trees scattered across a landscape, but I'm not going to show you that right now. I'm just going to manually move them around. Now, as I was telling you before about the duplicating the object or duplicating a link, if we Shift D to make another tree, it will be its own copy that we can edit, but I would, at the moment, I think 4 is enough, especially for such a small thing. And I'm going to Alt D, and that will duplicate a link that if we make any edits to the originals, they will transfer over. Of course, the materials, they're all using the same material, so if we make an edit there, we don't have to worry. They should all change. And I'm just pressing G in the top perspective, orthographic view, sorry. And I'm just going to move them around slightly. Alt D to duplicate. Now I'm going to go into side view and just make sure that they're touching the ground. Z, wireframe mode. You can see, maybe you just want to make it clip a little bit. It gets a bit messy in these spots, but we can just go into object mode, solid view, sorry, and just GZ, GZ. We can scale any of these as well. So maybe we want a few smaller baby trees rather than just the ones that we've got. So I might just grab these 2, go back into top view. It gives me a better look around. Alt D, even though it's linked, because we're scaling it in object mode, not edit mode, the links won't transfer across. A few baby pine trees around. Maybe add one over here. All right. Might just change some of those colors. I mean, it doesn't look the best, let's be honest. Dark. I'll just leave them, I reckon. Back into layout. And so that's the essentials of just creating an object, creating a landscape, giving them both a very basic texture. And with this, we can create a few things. I'm just going to go ahead and make a few small rocks that we can place around. Let's move these out of the ground. And as you can see, all of our objects have been labeled up here. And maybe we want to name these trees, the collection, and the plane. I'm just call this one the ground. I want the ground to be in its own collection so that I can quickly enable the trees or disable them. To do that, I'm just going to press M and then new collection, ground. When we press OK, we'll notice up on the top right hand corner that we have this collection that we can enable the trees, enable the ground. And I'm just going to turn both of them off for now. And then I'm going to start creating a rock. So I'm just going to start with the default cube, Shift A to add a cube. And now at the moment it's just in the main collection. So I'm just going to add a new collection. Also, instead of pressing M, I can just right click up here, new collection, double click on it. I'm just going to call this rocks. Since this collection is selected, anything that I add or duplicate will end up in this collection. I'm just calling it rock 1. The rocks are pretty simple to create. If we just want to create some round little balls, we'll just add the subdivision modifier and then back into edit mode. We're just going to, with pressing 1 to enter vertex mode, we're just going to grab a few vertices and stretch them around. And we shift duplicate, maybe make. Or actually, I'll just add another cube, start again. Subdivision surface. Move it around a bit. I might want to scale this one, the y-axis. Duplicate it. Scale it in general. Oh. A to select everything, scale. Now that we have our rocks, rock 2, 3. I forgot to add the first rock to this collection, so I'm just going to drag and drop. I'm going to create a new material. I'm just going to do it in this right-hand tab here rather than changing to the shading. New material, call it rocks. And I'm just going to make it a grey. Only this rock is colored, but we're just going to hover over the circle and drag and drop. I want the rocks to be pretty much fully rough, so I'm going to turn the roughness quite up. I'm going to enable the ground and the trees back again. And as you can see, we have created some boulders, and that's not exactly what was planned. That's fine. I'm just going to shift select them and then just S to scale them down. I'm going to now use some snapping to just place the rocks on the ground. So when we move them around, they'll automatically be at the ground level. And to do that, I'm just going to turn up this magnet up here. At the moment, it's set to the grid, which you'll see is these white lines. So when we move them, they will only move at 1 meter at a time. Instead, I want to change from increment to face, because we want to snap them to the face of the ground. At the moment, we'll be snapping the rocks from their closest face to the closest face of the ground. And that will make all the rocks look like they're kind of sitting on top of it rather than embedded in the mud. I'm going to use center, which will be the origin point essentially. And then that will snap to the ground. And so now that that's enabled, just click on one rock, G, and as you will see, it starts moving around the ground. And we can snap it to the rock, to the trees and whatever. And with that enabled now, we can probably just go from top view, G, R to rotate, G, Shift D, D. And we can always rotate the rocks in various directions to get different ends pointing out. So it seems like there's a bit more variation. Of course, you can go through and make different rocks and subdivide them some more or add some loop cuts like I showed you. But yeah, ultimately, it is your choice. These... Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I had the time. Yeah, I'm just going to add these rocks around and then we'll have a break. Thanks, Harry. You're on to me. Another quick way to rotate, if you're not caring about specifics, is just double tap R and it'll just rotate it around in like a free form way. The magnet is disabled by default and you can turn it on, but if you just want to enable it on and off with your keyboard, just hold Control. So if you just press G and then hold Control, it should snap to the ground. You'll also notice in this lighting, the colors will seem quite different because at the moment we've got quite greens and yellows coming through, but if we change it to like a dim room, it will, the lighting, yeah, affects how it looks. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that for now. We'll have a 10-minute break or so.
It's a bad computer. It's running very slowly.
And running it into a web poly.
I was gonna say, you want when you're in like material view.
Yeah. If I'm doing public coloring stuff. It's fine the way I'm using like it's got slow, so that's like on some of the recommendations.
Yeah, something that we some mushrooms. I think I'm gonna finish with some glowing mushrooms in the center.
Yeah, maybe some fireflies would be cool as well.
Yeah, the 5 plus. Yeah, I'll do something like that.
Is it possible to okay, so maybe it's mushroom in like a completely different file. Can I put that into
Yeah, but then it makes it really easy. So actually, if you just open both of them, you can just copy paste. Or if you go to file and there's an append, where it appends the blend file, and so you can go through and go, I just want that object instead of importing it. I'll show you. So yeah, if we just go file and then append, and let's say we'll open up this quick block in Blender, and it has the we want to go to the objects, and maybe we just want to grab this arrow, append, and then it should, in theory, the arrow will be there somewhere. Oh, there it is, I think. Yeah. Also just edit preferences. Your system, if it's on none, I think it just uses your CPU. And then when we get to rendering or whatever, we are using Eevee, so it should be pretty fine. But I'll show everyone to go, and if they've got a graphics card, make sure to enable it. And then if you're with, yeah. It should be all good. We're going to be using Eevee, so it's like the real time. But it's not, there's no ray tracing.
There's no evolution. No Sylvia, no Glaceon, no Jolteon. Try to do it after. It's only going to be 2 minutes. Oh, you can go for a walk.
So I can take Europe and
Chuck on.
I
I am way too slow.
yeah, so
I've actually got like a condition where I'm so slow. I realize I'm like, shit, that shit be right. So I have to
what's your sort of what's the condition?
like that's how my plan is that and then some that's why I get sick. Yeah.
Casting bars.
Wait, for what? Oh, you don't. I thought you meant you said it, and oh, no, that's the most. You said it, and I was like, oh, for what? No, it's fine. You don't say it. Well, go. I'm gonna try playing. I might have that out too. Still take a second. Yeah.
It's an age, so.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I'll show you. We do the table. I'll just like show you how to do the figure. Yeah, I mean you're probably great.
You gotta add like a few pages to it.
Have you written anything out before? Not really. Yeah, that's I was like,
I managed to change the countdowns. I still would figure it out. But
no, I've got a very good one. That's for sure. Just a bit. Just going to be recorded. You know, control B. Just select that. Essentially, only when it wants to carry you. And so that channel should visually to what they find. The find often in the whole side of the board. It's hard to understand, but yeah. And then just needs control alt B. Yeah, and it's the same.
so when I actually render it, is it like take more samples so it's less smoky?
Yeah, so it's good the camera around. Let's see here. Here's one sound 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It goes over to 32. When you render it, you want to do like 600 sounds. Yeah, where it is like for yeah. Or like it depends how much you want the denoise to do the work. Because with that now, you used to be like if you wanted to get a crisp result, 1,200 samples, take get it forever. But with the denoising, now you can get away with less than But if you go lower, it's not like it turns smudgy. You just noticing the details kind of disappear because the demos are not so low. Like I was working on more stuff that thing, the city where it was like when I had two low samples, or like the texture, it's some parts of it and the other parts are just a blur of the demos. It's all these noise.
I want to start writing my stuff because I have so much trying to write it in ZBrush.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know I can do lots and here it's easy.
Oh, yeah. It's, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Good way to explore. Yeah.
You can export objects of maybe
Yes, like I think that that's just, I mean, so you've got 5.2 million polygons, so like it would just,
yeah.
there would be a way of,
It's so it's like
oh yeah, it's, I mean, you can try exporting it, importing it, like, because it's just there, you're not moving and editing it, you might just be fine. But, yeah. Really round to the top.
that's stories. Scopes. See the last
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he really sees me now.
Yeah, it's air in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't really played around with it. Yeah. Oh, so.
Good night. Watch the science getting good. I just like walked around speaking.
Yeah. Oh, we went to Taurus and watch it, but we done. The rest of just need watch. 70% of our lives. None of them even like 3 months. 50% of the time you're working at it. Just nothing. It's the place. It's around here.
Yeah.
Anything in here,
Or
I'm going to.
how much? Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that one. Okay.
Somewhere on the ground in here, there's a loose ibuprofen. Like, someone said like,
Oh, okay.
oh no, it's like get dry. No, it's just like there's a pill on the ground there. Let's put that right. So ready? I've got my drugs.
All right. How long did they have to do the challenge?
A month. Yeah, the next one comes out on the 10th of next month. Yeah, the next challenge. I think I'm gonna do it because it's the holidays. Whereas the other one I really wanted to. Hello, Goofy King. How we doing? Are we ready to get started on the next bit? Alright, so I'm just gonna we'll start setting up a camera, getting ready to like build our scene and get it ready for rendering, and then from there we know what it will look like and where we want to move things or add things. So first thing I want to do is add a camera. So just add, and then camera. We drag it up, it'll be this thing. To go into camera view, let's close that with N. We just click on the camera. And as you saw there, it also says number pad 0. So if you just hit 0, it will snap to the camera view. While we're in the camera view, if we press N again, we just want to go tool, not view, sorry, not tool, and then just lock the camera to the view. And that means when we look around, the camera will move with us, which is pretty useful. And yeah, when you scroll and move. So if you pan, most people use this. I preferably, just to lock the camera to view, I use this thing called Shift Tilt, which basically turns the camera into like a first-person shooter. Tilt, and then I can move it around with ASD and W. And then A and E to raise and lower, and holding Shift to make the movements larger. At the moment, we're just making a small low poly forest scene, and then on top of that, it'll be on top of maybe like a realistic stool or something like that, and then we're going to render it out in Eevee. And then, yeah, just press another number on the number pad to snap out of the view, or just click the camera again. For this render, we're going to be using Eevee, and so to make it look nicer than it is, we just want to turn on things like ambient occlusion, some bloom, screen space reflections, and some motion blur we don't really need to turn on because we're not moving anything. And in the shadows, sorry, this is all in the render tab as well, so the top little camera one. And we want to just maybe turn the shadows on, depending on how good your computer is. It might slow things down, it might not. And then if we now go into rendered view, look at that, we have no lighting and it looks horrendous. To start off our scene, I'm going to add a HDRI. And that's what we've been using in the default preview of the shading. And a good site for downloading HDRIs is HDR Haven. Let's bring that one over here. So if we just go to hdrhaven.com and then HDRs, and you can scroll through and gather different ones that you think would look good. I have two here that I quite like for this setup, the Libombo Home and the Artist Workshop. These will give us basically a background and some basic lighting. The resolution that you want to download at, it really depends for the project. I think 4K is pretty much good for everything, unless you're really zooming into the HDRI and then you want 8K. 2K and 1K can still look a bit pixelated. I think I'm going to use this one, and I've already downloaded it for this example. One step. It is actually, that's a good point. I might just stick it in there and I'll stick the link in as well for HDR Haven.
If not, we put it in a Google Drive.
Oh no, the small images, they should be all good. Or they are 25 megabytes. We'll see if that, no, they're all good. I'll stick the links in. It should not take too long to download. And that one, depending on which one you'd like. This is for a interior scene, because I'm thinking this is like a miniature on a table, but if you wanted to download out in the wilderness or something and create a little low poly scene, you're welcome to do so. Once you have those downloaded, we'll go back into the shading tab. And then we're going to change it from the object to the world. And so this is essentially the background, and we want to change it to rendered mode. And now, as we can see, we basically changed the lighting of the entire world. Just like we added the noise textures in the object shader, we'll be adding an environment texture, which is the HDI. I'm going to enable an add-on, which is essentially a script someone's written for doing various things, and it will just make our lives easier. So if I just go edit and then preferences, and I'll go to add-ons, and I'll turn that one off, and I'll just look up Node Wrangler. I'm sure if you've had a class with Simon, he's probably already told you to do this. And then we'll just enable it and save the preferences. It's probably on autosave anyway. Close it. I'll just do that one again in case you missed it. So edit, preferences, add-ons, and then look up Node or Node Wrangler. and then click the little tick to enable it, and then just save your preferences. Now with this enabled, when we press N and down to the node wrangler, it will have all these options here for you. And instead of manually adding all of the mapping nodes, we can just click add texture setup, making sure that the background's highlighted, and voila, it's set these up all for us. All we want to do is just open the texture, find it in our downloads. I'm going to use the La Bombo, open image, and we're in the house. Let's do that one again. Delete. Shortcut for the texture setup you can find in the N is just Control T. Open either the artist workshop or the La Bombo. Once you import an image into Blender, depending on if you want to pack it in there or whatnot, for the current session, it will just be easily available in this little drop down. Because thanks to the node wrangler, it's already added the mapping nodes for us. We can rotate it around just using on the Z axis. If we go 0 on the number pad to our camera view, this will be essentially what our camera will see. I might rotate my camera around. 0. And I'm just going to go, I'll go into layout mode so we can see the keystrokes. Camera view, Z, rendered. And then it should lock to view, so I'm just going to rotate it around. And zoom it maybe a little bit. There we go. Back into the shading tab. I'm just going to rotate it around a bit more. And essentially it will be, we're going to use depth of field, so it will be pretty blurred anyway, but I just maybe want to rotate it so there's not something massive or intrusive in the background. I think right here works. There's a bit of variation, so it feels like you're in a room, but there's nothing easily readable. Now this may sound odd, but we actually don't really want the lighting from the room to affect the scene as much. It's pretty bright, as you can see, and we want to add our own little lights so we can change colors and whatnot. I'm actually going to turn the background down. The strength right here will just really show how bright or wrong it is. I'm just going to turn it down to 0.15. It's really dulled it down a lot. Still means we've got the image in the background, but it's not affecting the scene as much. That's all we're going to do with the background for now. So I'm just going to go back to the layout mode. I'm going to, once I'm happy with the camera, I'm going to unlock it so I can quickly snap out of it just by using the middle mouse button. So that's what I'm used to. To add a light, it's just like we added an object or a camera. So we're just going to add a light. Here's our various options. For this one, we want to be using the area light. The point light is essentially just a light in space that will shine in all directions. The sunlight is essentially a light that comes from everywhere, like the sky, and shines in a certain direction. And then the spotlight's like a torch or a spotlight you would see in a theater, where it's just a little circle and you can scale that and whatnot. But the area light is essentially a plane which we can move around and it will shine in one direction. To access our lighting options for this certain light, we just go down to the little green bulb. And we can move it to the side, rotate it. And at the moment, this light is far too dim to be noticed. And so we're just going to turn the power up. I think I'm going to do about 40 watts. Oh, I might do a bit more. 50. If you're into architecture or trying to get realistic results, you can actually use the watts and the scale of everything to get really accurate lighting. But I think at the moment I've seen, let me check, is, yeah, this is an 8 meter wide miniature. So the lighting we might just have to scale to different extremities. But yeah, it doesn't matter too much unless we're going for real realism. If you scale the light, essentially it will create harsher shadows. So the smaller the light is, the harsher the shadows will be, but the larger the light is, the less harsh. So if we just crank this up maybe to something crazy like 200, you see that the lighting's still pretty soft, but if we scale it down, the lighting gets a lot more harsh. I probably want something in the mid zone. Going back to the camera view, it's going to see what that looks like from there. Rotate it a bit more. Within the lighting options, you can easily switch between a spot, a sun. Well, there's the sunlight where it's coming from everywhere. And it's quite strong at the moment, but I'm just going to use an area. You can change the color. If you're going to add color to your lighting, I would do it very subtly. Because you can add like a very strong green or a red or a blue. But most of the time, you never want it fully blue or fully red, because I don't think any light can actually produce light like that. It's often just filters or different, like, I'm not sure how to describe it. Essentially, we just want subtle light changes, and then just maybe drive the strength up a little bit more. I want to turn the background slightly down a little bit more, just so it's a bit darker and our light shines through a little bit brighter. I might just set it to 1. We can Shift D to duplicate this light, and we're going to flip it over to the other side. So I'll just rotate it, G, and then I might just G and X or Y, move it across. We go from top view, we can see where it's affecting. I want it to be more of a bit of a backlight to catch the edges of these trees. And then we're in this view, see it there. We'll just go to camera view. Move it up. You can choose whatever colors you like. I like adding a dark blue for like a moonlight. It makes it feel a little bit more like nighttime, especially with the dim background. Usually I just use 2-point lighting, but you're welcome to add more lights or just one. I'm going to break the window in half. And then I can see it if we press N and T to get rid of these tabs. And then I'm going to turn these options off up here, go into rendered mode, and that's what it will look like in the final product essentially. Meanwhile, I can go around here and I can move the lights around, and it's all real time thanks to Eevee. Because we now have the camera set up, and if that's going to be where it's going to set finally, and we can always move it around, I don't really like the way that these trees are just whack bang in the center. So of course, everything's movable. Just going to move them around, maybe put them over here. Oh, might put them... Going back and forth, changing different variables. Maybe I want 300 watts for this one, slightly brighter. I might add a different hue to it, maybe a complementary color. Maybe turn it down the slightest. Go. Once we're happy with the lighting, I'm just going to now change some camera settings. And so I'm just going to close this window now that we're happy with it. Just by grabbing this corner, it's a bit fidgety to get right, but just click, drag, and then it should close. Most of the time it's left to right. Now in camera view, I'm actually going to click on the border of the camera to select it, or I can just select it up in the scene collections. Here's our focal length to our camera, and then we have all of our other options. Back to what I was saying before about realism. This is acting essentially like a real camera, so you can change the focal length, and with depth of field we got f-stop and all of that sort of thing. Because this is a miniature, what I often find helps to feel like you're really zoomed in is a really big focal length, so everything seems a bit more flat, and then very strong depth of field. So I'm going to turn the focal length up to about 100. And it will zoom in, and you go, well, that's not what I want. I'm just going to shift till, and then with the S key, just walk the camera back a bit. And just left click to apply it. Then depth of field, I'm just going to click, and it'll start to enable it. You can change where the camera's focusing with the focus distance. And yeah, as much as scrolling just with your mouse wheel, dragging left to right, you can get a pretty accurate result of what you want. I find what actually works really well is going to the viewport display settings and enabling limits. And essentially where this crosses is where the camera's focusing. And so when we move the focus distance, we'll see the cross moves. And I want it focusing somewhere in the middle. And I'll just snap back to camera view. If you did what I did with the windows, and you've closed the other one, and you're missing all of the other elements, just make sure to enable these up the top. The grid is getting in the way of my vision, but I still want to see my lights. So what I can do is actually open up this tab, and essentially it will have all of our different options for all the things within our scene that we can turn on and off. So I'm just going to turn the floor off. Back to what I was saying about making something seem very small, and adding that very strong depth of field. As much as now we've adjusted it, we want to turn the f-stops right down so we get very strong blurring. So we go into the camera, and then with the f-stops, you can just shift, scroll all the way down and get some pretty cool effects. In the last two recent updates of Blender, in the last month or so, they made major improvements to the field of view, depth of field, sorry, not the field of view, in Eevee, so it looks a whole lot better. Usually, I remember when they first released Eevee, there was no depth of field, and you had to use cycles, which is essentially ray tracing. Of course, this only shows in the material preview and the rendered. When we're in cycles, which is another rendering, the material preview is essentially like a lower quality version of Eevee. And then when we go to rendered, it changes. But in this case, we can pretty much work in rendered. Once we're happy with that, I'm gonna now go along and we'll add a little glowing mushroom. So, as we see, I've accidentally added... I've lost my mind. Sorry, yeah. You've seen collections, like, as funny as it is, I said what was going to happen, and then funny enough, I've gone and done it. In the rock collection, we've added all of our lights and cameras, which if it's your own personal project and you understand where everything is, that's fine. But especially when you come with collaborative projects and someone's like, I need the lights, where's the light tab? Oh, it's in the rock, sort of thing. And it gets a bit confusing. Usually I just stick things like the camera and lights just in the main collection. And then so they'll just be there as separate things. Alright, let's start making a little mushroom. I want to turn the floor back on, and we're just going to start. We can work in rendered mode or we can work in solid. I'm just going to turn the ground off, the rocks and the trees, and we're just going to add a cube, subdivide. You already know how to do this, but the shortcut for subdivision is actually just pressing Control 1, and that will just add one level of subdivision on the object. Of course, you can press Control 3 for 3 levels, 2 levels, and you can quickly switch between them. But for now, we just want 1. I'm going to tab into edit mode. 3 for face select, or I can click it up here. Click this one. And now I'm just going to press E to extrude. And I'm going to extrude it quite up a bit. Oops, I right-clicked and subdivided accidentally. Undo that. With face selection still on, I'm just going to Alt select these outside vertices, faces, sorry. E to extrude them, and just left-click to cancel it, or like apply it. But you notice when I scale, it scales in all axes. And I don't really want that. I just want it to scale along essentially the face that it's pointing. And to do that, it's just, sorry, E and then Alt S. And that will just scale it outwards along the way that the face is pointing. This gives us a little bit more control. And then if we wanted to scale it, we could do that too. This isn't a very mushroom looking mushroom, so what we're going to do is just select the top face, just with the arrow, drag it up a little bit, and we got this little knobbly mushroom. We're going to add a few loop cuts to control the subdivision and move the mushroom how we want it to kind of sit. So he's going to Control R, click, all the way down to bottom, left click, Control R again, left click, up to the top, left click. If you want a little button mushroom like that, feel free to leave it. I think I'm going to go for a more flatter or a dome, so I'm going to add another loop cut here and drag it down. I want a wider rim. This is still quite skinny, so what I'm going to do is press 3 for the face selection, alt click on this, but you notice when I alt click on this as well, I can only select one or the other. If you just hold shift, it will add that to the selection. And if you click on it again with shift, it will deselect it, just the loop. And I'm just going to scale it by Alt S, which is scaling along the normal direction, or the face direction, should I say. And we're going to scale it out a bit more and just grab this top mushroom. And I think I want this mushroom to be having a long stool. And so I'm going to grab this bottom loop and just shift to add to selection the bottom face. I'm just going to drag that one down a bit. I'm going to go ahead and add some shading. We can see that the subdivision is not applied. It is just sitting there as a procedural thing. And that's fine because we're not joining this to any other objects at the moment. I'm going to go into the shading tab. And here's our mushroom. It will still be left over from your world shading. So just make sure to change it back to object. We just want to add a new material, which will add another slot. We'll call this mushroom. We're going to have a mushroom stool and a mushroom cap. So we're going to add new slot, new material, mushroom cap. To make this mushroom just glowing, the entire thing, we can just delete the principled BDSF. Actually, make sure, because at the moment it's all the mushroom. So we just go into this shader, delete that one, and then we'll add a emission shader. And this essentially is just light. And plug it in. As you can see here, the thing has not reacting to any lights around it because it itself is just light. Within Eevee, when you add an emission shader to something, things around it in the world don't react to that light. You have to bake that in using various methods. Within cycles, it will react like it is a light, but that's all right. For what we're doing, we don't need the realistic light of it bouncing off all of the trees around it. Instead, we'll just add a little bit of bloom and it'll make it look nice. I'm just going to turn the strength up to maybe 3. And I think I want a little blue mushroom. For the case that I don't want the entire mushroom to just be glowing, I maybe just want the top or maybe spots on the top of it. I'm going to do exactly what we did with the textured setup. So I'm just going to add a mix shader. So we want it to be an emission and we want it to be a principled BDSF. And at the moment, it's 50% of both of them, so it's not too sure what it's meant to be. All we want to do is edit the factor. So I'm going to add a Voronoi noise, color to the factor. If you're happy with that, you can leave it there. If not, we'll just go a color ramp, drop it in. I'm probably doing it a bit quick, but all I'm doing is just Shift A to add, clicking the search, typing in the node I want, and clicking to select it. I find that's the quickest method, but if you'd like to go through these tabs, you're more than welcome to. And I'm just going to change the amount. I want it to be a constant interpolation, and so we only have a few little spots. As you see, I want where it is spotty to be emissive, and where it's not, it's not. All I have to do is just switch these. It's as simple as clicking and dragging. And I'm just going to move these around so it's more readable. We can add that mapping node like the way we did before, but thanks to the fact that we've enabled Node Wrangler, we can just Control T on this Voronoi noise, and then it will automatically add those 2 nodes for us. Or likewise, just go in here, add texture setup, making sure that this one's enabled. We want to be using the same mapping on the base, so we're just going to plug the vector into the, where is it? The emission. Oh no, I apologize, we don't need to do that. I'm just going to scale the noise a bit, that have these little spots. I'd like my mushroom to be black with glowing spots. I want the stem of the mushroom just to be fully black. So I'm just going to copy this node, copy, go to the mushroom cap. I've accidentally named them wrong. I'll just call this one stem. Paste, delete, or just set the color to black. Surface, tab into edit mode. And then if we just select this bottom face, we can alt select the loops like I've showed you before. But another useful tip is if you press Control and then plus on the number pad, it will add a selection, so it will keep building around what you've selected, and then minus to deselect. That is also, I'll just turn this one on for you, sorry. It should be on, there we go. And then we just want to go slot, assign. Oh, wrong one, assign. There we go. And it's also subdividing, as we can see here, the subdivision's making this loop appear down here as it's adding more geometry. I don't mind that, but for this sake, I'm just going to assign it and get rid of that. So it cuts off there. Now I have a nice little glowing mushroom. Now, if we enable everything else in our scene, turn it back, we've got a ginormous mushroom, and that's not exactly what we want, so we're just going to scale it down. And we'll go into camera view to see what it looks like, and maybe we'll just add it somewhere in the center. A useful tip for setting up your renders is in the camera settings, when we click on the camera or select it from the view layers, is if we go to viewport display and where we clicked limits to show where it's showing the depth of field, we can actually use composition guides. And this will essentially, it's kind of like not a cheat code, but it has different guides depending on different compositions that you want to use. The most typical, the rule of thirds or golden ratio, whatnot. I often use those just to try and line things up and point the viewer's eyes. At the moment, we're probably just going to do where we're just going to be looking into the center of the miniature and there's going to be a little glowing mushroom or maybe a group of them. I'm just going to rotate, G, Z, Shift D to duplicate, rotate. You can see the texture is the exact copy of it, but just as a little cheat, we're just going to Z. If you tap Z, it rotates on the Z axis of the world, but if you tap it again, it will rotate it on the Z axis of the object. And because we've rotated the object, it knows that Z is still up. Back to what I was saying about the transforms here, the rotation. And we can apply that rotation, but we don't really need to do that. Might just turn the camera down, like point it downwards. And I'm just going to do that by Shift Till again. Look down a little bit. Click, Shift Till again. And just press E to raise it a little bit. Actually, no, I don't really want the trees cropping off. I'll leave it like that. It's focusing right on those. Now we've only got 20 minutes left, so I was going to add more little mushrooms everywhere, but I think I'll just leave it like that for now. And so I'm going to go into the render settings, and under all of these tabs that we've enabled, there's various settings for, like, maybe you want to turn the ambient occlusion right up. Turning it right up can really, depending on your hardware on your computer, can like tank it a little bit, but for most of the time it shouldn't matter. The main one I did want to affect was the bloom, and so we can turn the emission up on the mushrooms to make it glow a bit more, but we can also just turn down the threshold for something to glow. And so if we turn it right down, or right up, sorry, we want to turn it, where is it? Threshold. Should be working. I apologize. Rendered, bloom. There we go. So now it's completely off. Everything that's emitting light is got bloom to it. So you just want to hold shift and turn it right down. And we probably do want to turn the emission up on these mushrooms, maybe to like 10. We'll go a little bit higher, 23. Although lowering the threshold can make everything seem very much a bit wish-washy and blurry. It's not very readable, but just move them out a little bit, maybe. Once I'm happy with everything, I'll just quickly show you how to render it out as an image, and then I'll go on to making the realistic table. Here's our settings that I've just shown you. Those are good to play around with, but the main ones for the rendering is your outputting properties. And so if you want to change the resolution of your image, like so at the moment it's just 1080 by 1920, and let's say we wanted to make it 4K. Instead of manually typing in these numbers, we can do that, or we can just turn the ratio up to like 200%, and it will render out 200% of 1080. At the moment, I only need it 1080, and the aspect ratio, and then our output. If we're doing an animation with lots of frames, it will automatically put them in this temp file, which you'll find just in your program files. If you just want to select another file to put them in, you can do that. But at the moment, we don't need that just for a single image. These are our render passes. And so we can pick various ones to get, in a sense, various layers that then we could go back into Photoshop and edit, like a depth or a mist pass, or like bloom, for instance. I'll just tick bloom in here. Not necessary if you don't want to do that. And then under our render settings, these are our samples, and these are basically how many times it was going to calculate the lighting. And the higher the samples are, the more crisper, in a sense, the result you'll get. 64 is pretty good for Eevee. We're not using real ray tracing, so normally in cycles you want anywhere from 300 to 1200. But 64 is good. And then once you're happy with it, we can just go render, and then just render image, or just hitting F12. And there we go. That should be a rendered image. And you're like, well, thanks, now I've got that. I want to export it. You just go image, save as, save it where you want to save it. Up the top on this right-hand corner, sorry. Here is what I was talking about by the different passes that you can enable. So we enabled the bloom, and so essentially this is the bloom of the image, and we can go and take this and then put it in Photoshop, play around with it, and combine them all together. And the depth field's nothing, but yeah. And that will be them all combined. That is the basics of just rendering out an image. And now for those of you who want to create the realistic table, as much as it seems like, oh, it's, you know, it's got a big texture on it and it's crisp, it's like it's probably one of the easier parts to do. All we want to do, I'm going to, for time's sake, I'm going to just add a circular table, which is as simple as just adding another cylinder. Vertices, I'm probably going to make it 32. And radius, turn it right up. And I might just go into object mode, depth. And I'm going to go into layout mode so we have more screen space. Just move it down a bit. And then just scale it with S. Move it down a bit and scale it. Now we're in camera view, we'll get a look at what it looks like. That's what it looks like. We're going to now add a subdivision surface to this. Again, another subdivision surface. But what you'll notice when you do so is we get this really ugly stretching. And that's essentially because the top face of this cylinder isn't four-sided. So a computer doesn't really know how to subdivide it. And the reason we use four-sided shapes as polygons is because you can subdivide it straight down the middle, whereas triangle, you can't exactly do that, and larger shapes, it doesn't really know what to do. We can now, however, make the top of it into a grid with all four-sided shapes, but the easiest method, especially if it's just a simple render that you're doing by yourself and you don't need to import or export it anywhere, is just pressing I to inset, and just inset that face slightly. And now essentially, because this is a perfectly flat face, the lighting, the subdivision doesn't need to bend or twist at all. And so it can be as very ugly geometry, as you can see here, but we won't notice it. And then I'm just going to go back into solid view, Control R to add another loop cut, out, add that little edge. I might do the same in this one, add an edge, and then the same on the bottom here, add an edge, and on the underside it will be doing the same thing. And we can actually just press I to inset. Whenever you use a tool like Control R or Inset, up the top you'll see all the little buttons that you can press. And I noticed, Harry, the other day you were doing that fan, and you were insetting and the outside was moving instead of the inside, or I can't remember if it was you or not, but essentially you were using an offset, which is just O. So if you just tap O, it will change if it's an offset or an inset. And I just want to scale that in a little bit. Control R, move it. And because now this is going to be a pretty smooth table, we can use smooth shading, just right clicking and smoothing shade. And still, if you find that it's too low poly for you, just crank the subdivisions up. Do be warned though, that's not what it looks like. That's actually what we've added. And we'll go to render mode. This table, depends how zoomed out you are, how zoomed in you are. At the moment, I'm pretty zoomed in, so it won't matter too much if I added anything underneath. But with the subdivision still enabled, if you wanted to add different bumps and lumps, or essentially it's like pottery, just insetting, extruding, insetting, extruding, Control R to add various loop cuts. Maybe we want to add scroll to add a few, maybe select with Alt, select with the face enabled, Shift. Sorry, I just need to do this again. So we'll do it again, just Alt, hold Shift, Alt, E to extrude, and then remember Alt S to extrude along those normals. We can inset a little bit, and we got this nice kind of, looks, I zoom it out a little bit. Just capture some of that. In one of my tests of this, I added a little rim to the edge of it, to the edge of the table, which is as simple as just tabbing, adding another loop cut, 3 or clicking face mode, alt selecting that one, and just extruding it up slightly. Oh yeah, that nice little rim. And I'm just going to insert that. There we go. I'm quite happy with that. It looks wood turned. Now I'm going to do some UV unwrapping so that we can apply a nice texture to it. Because I've made it a cylinder, this will be really easy to unwrap, as we can just cut it on one line, cut the top off of it, and then we can flatten it out. And so we just go into UV editing. This is not at all a, I'm not really showing you how to properly UV unwrap, I'm just showing you a quick method for this sake. So I want to maybe go on the back, because we don't want to see the seam where we've cut it, because the texture will clip into each other. And we just want to go edge, mark seam, and it'll show up red. And now when we UV unwrap, this is the default cylinder. If we unwrap, we'll notice we get this horrendous mess, and that's because we haven't cut a circle out on the top here. I've added this little lip to hide our seam. If we go to the back side of it, we might need to go into wireframe mode to see it. And just select that loop that's hidden in there. You can also turn this on just to make sure that that's the one we're selecting. Actually, might want to select, move that, add another loop cut, sorry. Just leave it. Select that one, Control E, or edge, mark seam. Select that one and that one, edge, edge, and clear seam. Another useful selection tool is holding Control, and essentially it will just find the shortest path. So if I wanted just to cut this right here, I could just hold Control and it will just join that line. But if I go here and here, you can see that it's found the shortest path. That's quite useful for if you want to select a line of vertices and it's not a loop. But I just want to select this one, Control E, clear seam, mark seam, and then for press U, unwrap. And we can see here we've got a pretty basic unwrap of this. We can move it around to maximize the space used, but because we're going to be using basically a procedural texture, we're not taking this into another program. The UVs don't matter too much, just the face or just the orientation that they are on. Now I'm going to be using a PBR material that's free from Ambient CG, and I'll stick the link in the Discord for you. But essentially it's just this wood. And you can see it's got all that little imperfections. Someone's done it all for us. Preferably, if you're downloading these sorts of materials, if we just go to this one, you can get all different textures for the plenty of free sites. Like this one is completely open source. I think I was just using something like that, but I sent the link in. When you download, you can download the PNGs. I'm going to use a 4K texture. Of course, with the PNGs, because they won't have all the compression issues with them. They'll be nice and crisp, but they are a much larger file size. Because we're not zooming into this a ton, I'm just going to download the JPEG version, which I've already done. Should be only about 60 megabytes. I'm going to add a new material to the table. New. And we've got this principal BDSF. Essentially, a PBR texture is a texture that will just plug into all of these nodes and various ones to change different materials or change different don't worry, I can't speak. So we just want to add a texture. We want to make an image texture, and then we go plug that into the base color, open. We have to extract the zip file into a folder, and I just want the color. And that's as basic as it is when it works. There we go. But of course, we don't want to have to do that a gazillion times. Of course, someone's thankfully automated it for us. And so we just want to select the principled BDSF, make sure it is selected, and then add a principled setup. And now when we go to our wood, we can select all of them just with shift click and then add the principled, and it'll do all the fun for us. It's automatically using the UV unwrap that we have done. I'll just change this one to a UV editor. And so you can see there, that's the way the texture is being displayed onto the geometry. For me, I think the wood grain is a little bit too big. I would like to scale it down. And of course I can just change the scales in here. But again, if we have to do something multiple times, we want to not do it. We want to automate it. And so I'm just going to add a value node and just plug that one in. And unless we wanted to stretch the texture, now we can just automatically scale it. I think maybe 3 times. I think that looks all right. Oh, you might want it maybe 2.5. And due to all this data, it's telling various materials that there is bumps and lumps, and that's through this displacement map and the normal map. I'm not going to go too in depth on these, but essentially the various maps, if we control shift click on a node, it will show it to the camera, like it will automatically view it. And for each color, it's basically telling the lighting to go in like a different direction, or that there is a fake bump there. And the displacement's doing the same sort of thing. And now if we just control shift click back on the principled, if you want to turn the bump down a little bit, I'd maybe just shift scroll on the normal, and you can flatten it out a little bit. We've also got quite a strange lighting error there, but that should hopefully fix itself with when we render it out. But that's because Eevee is not ray traced. And I just want to move that down, maybe scale it slightly. And then, yeah, that's the basic setup for a PBR material. And so we've gone through our basic nodes, materials, lighting, and render. All of these things can be adjusted.
Do you think you'd have time to show like how you would add grass or like texture that's like not, like it's visible texture?
Yeah, like a displacement.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's simple. In Eevee, it doesn't do displacement very well. It is basically, I'll show you in these settings on the side here. If we go options, viewport display, oh no, not this one, sorry. Where is it? Tool, node wrangler. Should be somewhere in here, unless it's in the textured. Volume, opaque. It might be in cycles, that's why. It will display a displacement like a, here it is, there we go, settings. It's saying if you've got a displacement, don't actually displace, don't move the geometry, just pretend, or like just show it as a bump.
Yeah.
Whereas if we go displacement only, it will actually try and move the geometry, but because we have such a low resolution, it doesn't have anything to move. Actually, I'll just go EV, new scene, new, there we go. I'll add a plane, and maybe we just want to subdivide it a lot. Subdivision. We'll go into rendered mode. Oh, we'll just preview it. And that's through that's through shading, sorry. If we just go to the wood, not that one. Oh, we didn't name it. Let's go wood. No, it's not a very good texture to show. I'll grab another one. Sorry. Yeah. I think I'm gonna be tracked down and slaughtered on my way home. This is a good. Yeah, we'll get one with stones in it. Explore.
Can you add that in the chat?
Yeah, sure. I'm just browsing right now. I've got the link to the site. This one's probably one of the best free ones, or mega scans. This one looks lumpy. As you can see on the sides, it's displaced. Like you can actually physically see. Whereas when it's just like a sphere and what I've showed you, it would just be like still round. It would look weird. And we'll download the JPEG because that should take quicker. Gravel. There's also displacement modifier, which I personally would use depending on the use. Sometimes it's good to just do it in the shading, and then because it won't actually affect the geometry until it's rendered. Like if we just go cycles, render it, new world. There we go. Add a sunlight. And if I go displacement only, see? Now it's actually displacing the, but this is in cycles. So, but we can change the scale of it. So it's doing it very slightly. But again, as you can see, it's only working with the resolution that we're giving it. So that's essentially, it can only displace this. And so if we just, subdivide it some more until it kills the computer, it gives it more geometry to move. For most cases, you can pretty much get away with just using a bump map, because adding all of that subdivision is just going to tank your computer for the minuscule detail, depending on what level you're at.
Do you think do you think UV mapping is easier to do than it is this one?
In what sense?
When I meant, I meant like
procedural textures.
yeah.
Yeah, they have their pros and their cons. I think procedural textures are probably the future, being honest. But because I've seen people create crazy things with it, and because it is procedural, it's infinite. You can have a massive object and scale it right down. But then with UV mapping, you've got the customizability to draw something on it, create realistic looking rust and whatnot in Substance Painter, which you can do procedurally in Blender, but there's a long, complicated process. But yeah, that's the bump's a bit ridiculous, but yeah, you got the gist. And so that's using the displacement in here, bump only. We'll change it. I might have to delete it for it tanks the computer. There we go. And if we just go, there's also all these modifiers. Actually, I'll just run over a few of them for you guys. Mesh, plane. Let's do Eevee. The main ones I use is solidify, which essentially adds a thickness, a procedural thickness to your object. So this is quite useful, especially when creating panels on things or like a head or a robot. You don't have to manually extrude it, and it's always there to change. And then we've got, what I was getting to was the displacement. Where is it? Cast displace, there we go. And this essentially will displace this on whatever texture you add to it. And if in your textures down the bottom here, this is where you can create noise or whatever you feel like. So if I just add a clouds noise, maybe scale it up a little bit. And then in the displacement, maybe add a few more subdivisions. You can see that it's changing, what was I saying? Yeah, it's just adjusting it. It's actually physically doing it rather than just when we are in rendered mode. Like that's object mode. And in this texture, we can import various. Yeah, I'll just add plane, add a new texture, rocks, caps, rocks. Download. Yeah. And then, so I'll just go back to, we're finishing up. So yeah, once you're happy with your scene and you've got your thing in there, just hit render. Might take a little bit, and then boom. And that's essentially what it is. I've accidentally put my mushrooms way out of focus, but yeah, all just adjusting all those little things, like all of the leaves on the trees. The joy of this as well is I can change any element of this at any time and still render it out. There's nothing's locked in. Field, focus, right back. And yeah, a quick little cheat, like if you're in Eevee and you really want the blue mushrooms to glow on the trees, you can just kind of fake it and add a light, just a point light, add it in there, make it maybe bluish. There we go. And now you'll notice that that light will shine on all of the trees. And that makes it look a little bit better, but yeah. Not a prime example here. Render image. Also, I'll just quickly show you guys, if you wanted to, I was thinking about the bedroom scene that Simon did with us, or the perspective. He's probably briefly talked about like the freestyle tool when you render something out. So we just go to the render tabs. Not the, where is it? I don't ever really use it. This one, just tick it. And then if we go to the little ball and the triangle scene properties, sorry, the other one. Yeah, there it is. All of our options are just down here for like the line thickness, line style, color, all of that. And which lines it is drawing, which ones it isn't. So I'll just move this up a little bit. I want to add this as a render pass though, or else it will just stick it on the top of my render, which is fine, but I'd rather just have it separate so I can do that in Photoshop. And then so when I render it out, there's that render, and then if I go to my passes up the top and just freestyle, there's my little drawn trees. Yeah, it's just cheating. But yeah. But no, that concludes everything. I'm gonna be here for a little bit if you want to ask questions and whatnot. Yeah.
I hope everyone enjoyed. That gives some variety